Go ahead, please.
All right. So this is somewhat impromptu because I thought the format would be that Francis Heylighen would present his field theory paper, and we would continue a discussion of it that occurred on the Club of Remy in the spring. So can I share my screen?
Yeah, you just push that button.
Okay.
The green button.
Let's see. Green button.
If you the share screen, it will ask you which screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see it now.
Okay. Is that good? Is that big enough?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I thought would be the format is that he would present his theory and also any updates that they have of it, ideally in response to the things that we talked about in March. But so my comments are mostly directed towards that. I went back in preparation for this. I went back and looked at, tried to look at the last video of the presentation of the theory, and it turns out there's only 19 minutes of it, and none of the discussion. So I looked at some of to see if there were other lectures of his on his theory of consciousness, and there's an excellent one back in 2019 that I recommend to everyone to look at about global workspace theory, basically, and distributed concepts related to consciousness. Now, I am planning to give a 1 hour sort of crash course in my view of consciousness. It's not intended to be comprehensive or systematic of all points of view. That would be impossible to do in an hour, let alone maybe a day or a week. But I'm going to give that for the Club of Remy here in this forum on November 17th. Just to introduce myself, I have experience. I was an undergraduate biology major. I was interested in biology and psychology because biology is the first science in which the functional organization, has a critical role or dimension. And so intellectually, I come up through cybernetics and systems theory. My graduate work was in a system science program at Binghamton. I became an auditory neuroscientist and worked on problems of neural coding of pitch and rhythm and music and the brain and temporal coding. And that's a whole nother dimension. And have proposed timing net theory of the brain, so theoretical neuroscience. I also, since the 90s, have participated in the scientific discussion about the neural basis of consciousness and have written some stuff. I attended some conferences and did some consulting on that for a foundation. More recently, I taught for
a second, Peter. What is that word code in your previous slide? Percept code action.
Coordination.
Coordination.
Abbreviated it. Yeah. Percept coordination action systems.
Okay.
I'll explicate that in a minute. So I taught a course at Boston Conservatory. It was their science distribution, and there was a very creative and forward-looking chairman of the department there, and they needed a neuroscientist to teach neuroscience of the arts, which I did, which is a different course. But I also devised a course on consciousness studies. And I published some writings on this subject, mainly about neural coding and anesthesia, and presented a poster about organizational closure through signal regeneration, the notion of autopoiesis of neural signals. So a self-producing, self-reinforcing, self-sustaining network of neural signals. And that was back in 2009. So, and actually going back to Francis's talk, the earlier one in 2019, there's huge overlap between our points of view. There are only a few issues which I think we differ, at least with his perspective back then, a pre-pandemic perspective. And most of it is that this idea of a global workspace and the notion of a self-sustaining set of processes, and usually these are linked with working memory, that sustain neural signals. That seems to be the hallmark of, or the criterion, or the necessary condition for, it's a better way of saying it, the necessary condition for there to be awareness in the first place. And then the particular signals that are being regenerated constitute the contents of consciousness, like whether you're seeing a blue triangle or a red Volkswagen or a house or whatever is in your, or middle C, whatever is in your conscious awareness at any one given moment. So one of the things that I thought, that the field paper and the discussion around it didn't do enough of is differentiate between different senses of consciousness. And I think any discussion of consciousness needs to keep in mind that people are using the word in very different ways. And sometimes they're conflating several senses of the word. So one conception of conscious awareness, that we have first-person subjective private experience. John Searle says, it's the experiential difference between sleeping and waking and being anesthetized. And there's a very good YouTube video, a TED Talk of him.
Chandler 我们的客户呀
I'm sorry? Oh.
Chandler
So this is also, what most people think of in terms of creature consciousness, something that many, if not most of us, believe animals have. It's a property of individual brains with self-sustaining global local signals or working memory. That would be my take on it. And the neural basis of experience is explained in terms of these global neural workspaces. And workspaces, I think, is sort of a bad, not the best metaphor, but it serves okay in many cases. And that's really the focus on the mind-body, the classic mind-body problem. It's really focused on the neural basis of NCCs, which are the neural correlates of conscious states. What are the necessary neural processes that are needed for one to be conscious of anything, to be aware at all. And then the NCCCs, which are the neural correlates of the contents of consciousness, which again are the specific neural patterns of activity or signals that are underlying and inherently associated with different sensations and experiences and thoughts that we have, emotions, drives, motivations, memories, etc. The second major way that people think about this is consciousness as informational function. and really about the neuronal integration of information, where the thought is that consciousness subserves informational functions, which are percepts, thoughts, emotions, decisions, etc., and enable integration of memory. So in that conception of things, consciousness is an informational process. And I would say that Tononi's theory, which is really a theory of informational complexity, that's the capability of a system to maintain and differentially behave according to some number of distinctions that it can make. That's sort of in this way of thinking. It's not focused on awareness per se, which, by the way, is I think is really Chalmers' hard problem. Why does awareness exist at all? But it looks to consciousness as being an integrator of information, and because it's an integrator of information, it allows for coherent information processing and integration, and anticipation, all sorts of things. And so one could view it as an evolutionary product, a product of natural selection, that's a useful thing for organisms to do if they're going to have behavior that's appropriate and effective in promoting survival and reproduction. One of my suggestions, it's really not a criticism so much as that Francis's presentation, as do many others, vacillated and sort of conflated those two ways of thinking about consciousness, about awareness and informational integration. There are also a bunch of theories out there, mostly coming out of symbolic cognitive science and computer science and maybe mathematical physics, and some philosophy about self-consciousness as being the hallmark of consciousness, or the primary example of consciousness. And that's where you have awareness of awareness, reflexive representations, recursive processes, higher order theories of consciousness. And there can be individual and social interactions within and amongst brains, as long as you have the right recursive form, and those who are aficionados of Spencer Brown, would recognize this. There's a fourth one, which is collective consciousness, which is where there's common understanding among groups of individuals via communications and conversations. There are some radical versions of this theory that say that there is no individual consciousness per se. It's all collective consciousness. There's no consciousness without social interactions. George Herbert Mead would be an example of that. We had some discussion in this forum with Bernard Scott's book and take on consciousness, which has some of that in it. There are also strong and activist externalist conceptions. And by the way, I think the collective consciousness view is really a social determinist view. Again, that the contents of our consciousness are all completely mediated by social interactions, which I reject that. I think there's a certain relative level of autonomy between individual thinking and feeling and awareness and what we get in our interactions with other people. There's finally a strong and activist externalist conception of consciousness that comes out of Gibsonian psychology. I think also behaviorism, and also maybe Skinnerian psychology, which says that mind and consciousness are not in the head, but in the organism environment dynamics. There's a denial of mind. Many of them are followers of Ryle, who's a sort of mental denialist. There can be a denial of internal awareness as being not, you're talking about subjective and subjective observables and not private observables and not public observables. So there's a wholesale rejection of what they call mentalism and representationalism, which I think in the extreme form is not justified, but that's a whole nother discussion. So I think it's fair to say Francis come out of cybernetics, in which our primary touchstone to nature is the percept coordination action cycle, in which you have an ongoing cycles of perception on the left side and action on the right side, and a systems in the middle that decide what action is appropriate given what particular sensed conditions there are. So this middle part is a coordinative system, and nervous systems in animals play most of that role. Maybe not all, but most of that role. And animals need this kind of flexible percept action mappings because they're motile. Their environments, their local environments are constantly changing. They need to sort out what is invariant, in their sensory fields from what is not, and what's a possible threat from what is not, what is edible from what is not. Unlike plants and other organisms that are mostly can get along without a lot of sensory processing and specific action, animals have to figure out what to do at every instant. So in the middle, when I started out, this was in my thesis. This was in my doctoral thesis in the 80s. And basically, there are different modes of adaptation that can occur within choosing percept action linkages, and also within building the sensory receptors and motor effectors that you need to deal with the world so as to persist and survive and reproduce. Within these percept action coordinative linkages, there are goals. There are internal goals of the system. And there are evaluative mechanisms for evaluating the current state of goal satisfaction, so that if your ionic balance is off and you need to hydrate, the system steers your behavior towards finding a source of water, and or food, and or a mate. So there's a whole defeasible soft hierarchy of drives and needs. One thinks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And there are mechanisms within nervous systems that have embedded goals that involve circuits, in the frontal lobes of vertebrates that are mediating between which goals are paramount at any one time, which ones are the most urgent. There are other parts of the brain that are dealing with the orchestration of perception and action vis-a-vis specific goals. So the basal ganglia, the striatum, is all about that, in my opinion. So one can point to neural systems within the brain that are mostly devoted to processing sensory inputs, that are mostly devoted to motor outputs, that are devoted to deliberation and figuring out what action is needed vis-a-vis embedded goals, on which ones are most urgent in any one moment, and how to effectively reach those goals or satisfy those goals. Now, my mind-brain process schematic, and this is a cartoon, and I'm just going to give this one so it's a little bit more developed. But the brain is a network of loops. For the most part, there are structures like the cerebellum and perhaps the striatum that are not that don't have reentrant loops. Reentrant being that if there's one, for example, the cerebral cortex is famously a reentrant structure. Every two areas of the cortex that are connected are connected reciprocally. So there's always a forward path and a backward path. And vis-a-vis consciousness, there is evidence that what you need is a completion of one of those loops, a global loop, in order for some stimulus to come into awareness. If it doesn't have this forward-back reentrant behavior within the system, then one is not consciously aware of it. So this can be achieved by having masking stimuli that are, you adjust the timing or the briefness of it. So it's half the trials are subliminal, that the person isn't aware that they saw something, versus half the trials are supraliminal, which means that the subject saw what was presented. So this is a complex diagram. So I think of all of these processes as being loops, in which there are afferent and efferent pathways. But in the center of it are loops, global loops, that are sustaining and reinforcing local loops. And this is what I would call regenerative short-term memory, or mostly what we've always, people have been thinking about it as short-term memory or labile memory, or working memory is another word, that contains the contents of what we are aware of and attending to at any one given moment. So a way of thinking about this, and this is not the typical way that neuroscientists think about things, is that there are a lot of neural signals. I think they're temporally coded, but that's a whole nother ball of wax. But there's a set of neural signals that are percolating through the system, and they can either be circulating in local loops, or they can also be circulating in local and global loops. And the global loops are reinforcing the local loops. So there's a coherence across the system, across the global loops. And a way of thinking about that is that then the signals that are currently being regenerated constitute the contents of present awareness. And so when I say elephant, all of a sudden that word comes into your working memory, and all your memories of elephants and all the different meanings of elephants start to be activated and recruited into this ongoing ensemble of neural signals. So that's sort of my take on now. Working memory is a functional has a function in informational organization, but it also, I believe, it's a regenerative aspect of it that allows for sustained neural signals that I think also underlies awareness. Now, this is not to say that awareness per se has function in and of itself. We can get into that, because that's one issue that I think I may differ with Francis, in that I don't think that awareness itself has causal function in changing brain states. I think both the informational functions and the awareness supervene on what's going on in the brain. But we'll get to that in a second. I mean, most of his talk was going to be reactive. I'm sorry, but just let me know when we need to get to a discussion. I'll continue until I hear some outcry to get a word in edgewise. Okay, is that all right with everyone?
It's all right. Please go on. We have plenty of time today.
All right. Well, so and we'll have much more time in November, and I'll have a more coherent and step-by-step treatment of it. So one can think about the contents of neural conscious awareness as private observables. In terms of observables, how we have access to awareness versus how we have access to what's going on in the nervous system and the body and the rest of the world, the rest of the physical world. The supraliminal, the contents of our awareness are private observables. The contents of the nervous system, what's going on in the nervous system, that's correlated with what person is experiencing or the animal is experiencing, are public observables. We can look at EEG, MEG, we can look at gross neural potentials, we can look at single units. There are, fMRI, there are a host of observables we have available. Now, just to head off, I think we are both our conscious selves and our unconscious selves. We are our brains and our bodies. Our brains are part of our bodies, but there is a pretty clear distinction between the nervous system, which is a system that is evolved and specialized for sending messages, and coordinating both the internal regulation and the external behavior of the organism. That is pretty clearly demarcated from the rest of the body. Not to say that there are not rich interconnections, and the autonomic nervous system is mediating many of those. But by and large, most cells in other kinds of tissues don't spike. They don't seem to send information or messages in the same pulse-coded way that neurons do. There are the contents of awareness, and then there are contents of our subconscious mind, which is basically everything that's going on in the nervous system that is not part of these global loops. And it may be the bulk. It's hard to say, but it probably is the vast majority of neural processes that are going on we're not aware of. We're only aware of sort of the tip of the iceberg, or
Quick
only
question.
those things. Yeah.
Quick question. Are you familiar with the practice of a Qigong or meditation?
Yes. somewhat.
So would that have an effect of expanding your blue circle here into the white area?
No, I think meditative states would be here. They are alternative states of awareness where people are either focused on one thing, you know, like a mantra or a singing bowl or you know, some tone or other focus, or, and I don't know if you include mindfulness in meditation, but or they're allowing themselves to freely examine whatever, you know, whatever comes into one's mind. So I put meditation in terms of a different state of awareness. It's not exactly a waking state. You know, hypnotic states are also in there. Trance states are in that category. It could be that you could also put minimal states of consciousness, some of those in that category. Sleep, I think, is or say non-REM sleep, deep sleep, I think is not in that category. But there are some stages of light sleep, like lucid dreaming, that might be, that you could put into that category. So it's not necessarily a rigid distinction. But generally speaking, we hold the most distinctions in mind at any one point when we're awake, you know, and ideally if we've had several cups of coffee.
Well, I have a family tradition of one type of specific meditation practice that my observation is it might have some effect to change the ratio or the boundary of your blue circle versus the white one. But that's a different topic that we can arrange another discussion. I can let you know the whole practice and you can try. Now,
sure.
Jenny had raised a hand.
Yes.
And I think it's interesting that, I mean, I agree that these practices can change these boundaries. The boundaries are not immutable.
Yes. My comment, actually, since we were invited to give comments, is also linked what you just said about the mind holding much more distinctions when the mind is awake as opposed to when it's meditating or something. In your opening slide, I think that was the thing that was missing. Just when you said there are different models, and I recognize Husserl. Yeah, Husserl. Dus the self-consciousness, there you made a reference to George Spencer Brown. And then you also, in number 4, you made a reference to George Herbert Mead. So I think there is something that you missed there, and that is Husserl, who says consciousness is a mind making distinctions. And so you could say that self-consciousness, but that's not necessarily the case, because the first distinction that the mind makes when the baby is born is self-other, and the other is the mother, and then of course you have the environment also. But so there is the self-consciousness that I see, and that some people think that is what Spencer Brown is doing, that it is self-reflexive and recursive. But actually, I don't think it is. Or let's say there's two models. There is a model that says, well, it's recursive, and that's all, and that's a fascinating way to go. And then there is another model that say, no, it's discursive. And then you stick with this idea of the mind making distinctions, but there is a whole different set of distinctions that becomes relevant. And I was reminded of it by your meditation slide because of something that Jerry Chandler said that really made a difference for me. And he said the following: The problem with some people is that they live too much in their head. No, but that is a distinction.
Well, you know,
And
that's what an extrovert would say of introverts, right?
yeah, no, but can I say, if we look at this from a logical perspective, this is a very important distinction that is part of your presentation. And so it occurs.
Well, first, let me say this. I purposely said some different senses of consciousness because this is not
Yeah.
meant to be exhaustive. I could only get 5 on the page.
Yeah.
There are also religious, you know, there are all sorts of other metaphysical and religious
No, I
conceptions of
agree.
it.
I agree. But since we
And
are,
I wasn't trying to maybe I did, but I wasn't trying to argue in favor of any of these, just to say that there are different ideas, different sets of ideas, and then we need to keep clear about when someone is in this mode versus this mode versus this mode, what they're thinking of when they use the word consciousness. Just in terms of clarity, I get really frustrated when people launch off into discussions of consciousness and they're not clear about what they mean.
and I mean,
Questions?
100% agreement. Can I just finish? But
Yeah.
I still would put the Husserlian view of just saying a process of making and experimenting with distinctions as something separate, because that is the turn that Husserl did from logic to phenomenology. And that is very minimal. There is not too much other assumptions added to that. It just puts the focus on distinctions. And Peter, when I hear you, that's what you're doing. You're pointing out to Francis that he forgot a whole bunch of distinctions that are actually relevant. So that is the reason I give you the feedback. It's actually a form of a compliment to help you make your presentation more.
Well, I should say as a semiotician, I also use the word distinctions, but not in the Spencer Brown. Well, actually, it is consistent with Spencer Brown's sense. I just, well, this is down the pike. I reject the whole idea that of self-description and reflexiveness. I believe that self-production is important, but not self-description.
I totally agree with that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, all right.
Two quick questions. Two questions. One quick one is that in number 3, back your original slide. In number 3, what is that HOT theory? HOT.
They're called higher order theories of consciousness.
Higher order theory.
Like whether you have one part of the brain that's monitoring the other parts, or whether you have a program with a recursive module or process.
Okay.
Some people would argue that that's sort of the hallmark of consciousness. And my point there is that when you're talking about that, you're not necessarily talking about awareness per se.
Okay, second question is, where do you put Francis' work here, and how would you agree or disagree with him?
He was, well, this is from the YouTube. This is mostly from the YouTube, the earlier YouTube from 2019, because I just saw that and I don't remember well enough our discussion, and there was only 19 minutes of it. But Francis is dealing with conscious awareness and global neuronal workspaces in that talk. But he also asserts that consciousness has informational function. So a possible criticism or point of discussion would be whether those two things should be conflated, and whether awareness and informational function are necessarily bound together. I'm not so sure that they are. And I have some slides coming up that talk about that, because I was I was prepared to talk about this issue of whether consciousness has function. You know, one of my other areas, my other fields is music and the brain. And people are always assuming that, oh, well, because, well, almost all humans like music in one way or another. That, oh, well, there must have been evolutionary specializations for it. And those must have been driven by specific selective pressures. So they come up with all sorts of ad hoc explanations, like, you know, we sing to babies in motherese because that keeps them quiet, and you know that's good in terms of evading predators. Or we use music in order to coordinate groups of humans, you know, like by beating drums or chanting together or whatever. And you know, it's not necessarily the case that those theories are I mean, they may be true, but there may be deeper reasons why humans and many animals respond to music. So it's not always the case that whatever is present in brains or in organisms must of necessity be the product of directed natural selection. Sometimes there are structural explanations for why these things are. In the case of music, I think that the brain uses temporal patterns to organize information and integrate information and encode specific information like pitch and rhythm, especially. And if that's the case, then if you impress particular time patterns on neural firing patterns, as music does in spades, then you can modulate various different kinds of brain functions. Now, this is not an adaptationist explanation for why it would be that animals are also affected by music. It's a structural explanation. And likewise, there may be a structural explanation, and I don't necessarily claim that it's adequate, but there may be a structural explanation for why that we have awareness for a particular organization of neural activities. So it's not necessarily the case that awareness has to be functional in order to be present in our awareness and associated with our brain activity.
Have you ever make connections between music and the sex?
No.
Sexual behaviors.
No. I mean, Darwin, in another grab bag sort of category is to attribute everything to sexual selection. When you can't explain it by anything else, there's always sexual selection.
But I think that Jason was thinking maybe about orgasms, and there is actually
Exactly. There's all
Wright.
neural activities, right?
Yeah.
The neural activity, and there's a pattern and the rhyme. And
Yeah.
if you go back to check all those interesting symphonies, and you always have that dun 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 at the end, right, to conclude. So,
yeah. Well,
so
people
that
have chills.
is very interesting things going on there.
I mean, people have chills, which are also described as skin orgasms, or frisson, that can be created by music. I mean, one could regard orgasms as an alternative state of awareness, or awareness. We haven't discussed those at length, and I think it's been sort of understudied, although I do think that there are a few isolated studies of people having orgasms in
Well, let's do another
I-
session, and you talk about brain and music, and we can connect it there.
And there certainly is there certainly are neural correlates of orgasms and neural correlates of orgasmic experiences. I would bet my life, but we know less about those than probably just about any other state. All right. Should I move on, or
Boris, do you have some comments or sharing some of your thoughts going on there with us?
Do we hear?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that if you're talking about nervous system, I don't know. Is this a theory of Francis Heylighen, or it's your, Peter?
most of what I presented to you are my points of view. I did not prepare. I prepared to be, to respond to Francis, and not necessarily to present his theory, because I don't know what it is. I know Francis from the late 80s and 90s when he was working on the Principia Cybernetica project, and I was in systems science and theoretical biology. I went into neuroscience in the early 90s and was really preoccupied with that. So I haven't really been in touch with Francis since all that. So it's actually wonderful to come back to meet and talk with him. But outside of the other session that we had, I haven't had a conversation with him yet. So I was going to let him present his own point of view. But this is my take on where he is and what I think. And as far as I can tell, with the exception of this idea of awareness having informational function, I believe our thinking is very close. His 2019 talk is very clear. I really like it. And it presents the neural workspace theory and neural coherence theory very clearly. So yes and no. I mean, it's my interpretation of Francis's theory and my own beliefs.
And do you understand Francis' theory?
I understand his 2019 theory better than their recent paper, which is the field theory. But I believe that he hasn't changed his ideas. I think that it was just it was a misfortune that labeling of his theory as a field theory, which gives the wrong impression. I don't necessarily think that electrical fields or gravitational fields are conscious.
You think
I'm not
that's
sure.
just a metaphor he was using?
Well, yes, but the word, and this is just a quibble about word meanings and kind of, people can use words however they like as long as they're clear about how they're using them. That's my take on it. There's no proprietary. One does not have a copyright on a particular word. So it's just, if you're going to choose a word, if you're going to choose words to describe your theory, it's best to choose words that don't mislead people. Either not intentionally, but just don't give them the wrong idea, because then that's a barrier to their understanding what you're actually saying.
Okay,
and,
we're going to send this video to him, and
yeah.
And maybe you want to, he will respond. Maybe you have some last question to ask him.
Well, I think we could have a discussion about whether what are the neural requisites and correlates of the contents of consciousness, awareness, and the contents of states of consciousness. So what are the neural correlates of particular contents of consciousness, like hearing a pitch at middle C, or seeing a red triangle as opposed to a yellow Volkswagen, or whatever. And what is his current thinking about global neural workspaces? I think we share the idea that the nature of the organization that's needed for conscious awareness and informational integration is this kind of autopoiesis-like self-regenerating, this network of self-regenerating neuronal signals or signal productions. So a self-production network. I think we fundamentally agree on that. But we may disagree about the philosophy of whether awareness per se is causal, or whether both awareness and informational functions supervene on particular organizations of neuronal activity. I think that those would be the most productive avenues for further discussion and clarification.
Yeah, we're going to have another session lead by Boris, reviewing cybernetics and how brain works. So we can continue this over there.
Sure.
May I ask something, Margaret?
Yeah, she raised
Margaret,
her hand.
may I say some critical words about this presentation, and you will not be angry?
You muted.
We don't hear you. We don't hear you.
No, it is not that I'm angry. It is like that something springs up in me, and irritation is slightly more better, because I think I wrote that on the list, that there is a conversation going on because we feel triggered to respond. But go ahead, Boris. I'm listening. Yeah.
May I say two or three words about this presentation?
Yes.
Okay. I think, Peter, if we are talking about nervous system, we had to have some picture about how nervous system is structured and how it functions.
Yeah, sure.
If you want to get structure of the nervous system, then we had to know something about anatomy of nervous system. That will give us structure, because
Sure.
there are millions of medical workers on the world who think the same about anatomy of nervous system, and
Yes.
it's the same with physiology. So this is
Yeah.
the first thing. I think when we are talking about nervous system, we had to have clear picture about its structure and function, or structure and organization, as, for instance, Maturana would say. The second critical thought is about view of neuroscience.
Well,
Many.
let me stop you for a second. Can you expand on how you think about the high-level structure of the nervous system? So, Wally Nauta had a diagram of the vertebrate nervous system, that included about maybe 8 or 10 modalities. Michael Arbib, in his original book, the Metaphorical Brain, had a very cybernetic take on functionalities of the nervous system. And what are the major structures? So how, I mean, what would be your major, what would be your first order description of that?
If you're coming from the perspective of cybernetics, then first order of nervous system is controlling the homeostatics of the body. So it's controlling the survival of the body.
Yes.
That are necessary functions. Without that functions, there wouldn't be any living being.
Yeah, including behavior.
Yeah. Then anatomical structure of nervous system shows that there are hierarchical structures of control loops, which you showed as somehow parallel and so on. But these control loops are mostly hierarchically structured, and they are function in the recursive way. They function in recursive way up, and they are functioning in recursive way down. You have,
There are afferents and efferents in all sensory systems.
There is afferents and efferents where?
In all sensory systems and motor systems, and the reentrant loops. Yes.
Yeah, but
it's
this
a system of loops.
Usually you also showed environment, and you showed only afferents and efferents only in external environment.
Well, no, there are. Let's see.
That was also what Margaret
this is
was
better.
surprised.
This also
that
has
is internal functioning, and external functioning. And internal functioning should be the same presented as external functionings with afferents and efferents.
Yes,
and then you
yes,
get the
I
whole
agree with
picture
that.
of the,
Sure.
and then you get the whole picture of the body.
I agree with that. Yes, and I included that in this version of it, where you have autonomic regulation. The vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body, and it's got both afferent and efferent pathways. And there are interoception, our sense of pain, various interoceptors that are related to all sorts of internal variables that need to be regulated. But the nervous system is both regulating the bodily organs, and it's also regulating behavior.
So how will you put this together?
What do you mean? They are together. It's doing both things.
I don't see how they're together. Because if you would show how they're together, you would know where goals are coming from.
Goals are internal to the nervous system. Some goals are built in. Some goals are I think self-organized, but basically we have drives like being hungry or being thirsty that are wired in.
Yes, they're wired in.
I mean, are you saying that there are no goals in the nervous system?
We are saying that goals are in the nervous system and they are hierarchically arranged,
No,
but the first problem we have on the first level.
Nervous system
how goals are produced in first level.
The nervous system works, but it's not about. Sorry, I apologize.
Yes, I will talk about it when I have presentation about how brain works. It will be also about this,
Okay, good. All
right.
Margaret, will you come?
I look forward to that.
Boris, I might have a hypothesis to answer your question, but next time, not today.
I apologize. There is someone else here out of screen listening, and we were having a private conversation about what was being said here. But since this is going to be sent to Francis, then I think we should maybe also mention that I think, Boris, the questions you brought up are the questions of the method of how you do this research, and you brought up the importance of bringing and being very explicit about the other assumptions that are not central to consciousness, but that need to be put on the table. And I think if Francis is just casually picking some word that is actually can lead to misunderstandings, it is evidence of a very poor attention to the scientific method and absence of courses in the scientific method. So that there are all these people who think that they can get away with picking and choosing whatever word they like. And it's not just Francis. I think it is a culture. And I think that is the reason why the world is so dysfunctional today, because everyone is choosing the words they love to use. So continue, Pete.
I have only one question more. May I? Can we see one example, live example, how all this works? For example, a live example can be we are driving a car, or the live example can be how steersman is coming with a ship from point A to point B, because you know that cybernetics is steering, you know, from point A to some goal. That is cybernetic.
Sure.
And can we describe with your model how this is happening, how steering is happening, how driving a car is happening, how walking is happening, how running is happening, how, for example, Margaret is going to a shop is happening. Can we do some examples how this
need
works?
another session.
Hi, Boris. Are you asking me?
Yes, I'm asking you, yes.
All right. Well, so
One example, if you can make it out of this model.
Well, this is a high level schematic of mental functionalities or faculties, and what I perceive as underlying recurrent processes that are going on in the brain. So when we have in our mind that we want to go, let's say that I want to get something out of the bedroom, that I want to get an article of clothing out of the bedroom, I have in various areas of my brain that I have that are constantly competing in order to for me to attend to some goal, that for one reason or another, that desire to get something out of my bedroom, to get, let's say, a shirt out of my bedroom, has come to the fore and is dominating the signaling within my working memory. That in turn is also organizing circuits in the basal ganglia, striatum, to affect the chains of action that are needed to satisfy that goal. Those patterns build up in those circuits, and I initiate walking towards the bedroom, and there's a chaining process, and there are nuances involved in how that operates, but there's a chaining process in all the sub goals that are needed to be achieved when I make it into the bedroom, and then that's completed, and I'm there, and then I search for the article of clothing that I need, and then I grab it and come back. So there's a whole chain of processes that are related. They're not necessarily rigidly chained to each other, because and sometimes we can forget what the overall goal was, and we forget, well, why did I come into the bedroom? We have to recall what it was that made us go in there. but there's a goal-oriented behavior that's put into place. There are sensory cues that we use, to guide us into the bedroom. There are motor outputs that are being affected that keep us, on course. If we're playing baseball and we're in the outfield, and a fly ball is hit, that's coming our way, we have the goal of catching the fly ball, and we use our sensory inputs to position ourselves so that we're under the trajectory of the ball. So the ball is going to come, and we're going to position our arms and our baseball mitts so as to catch the ball. I don't think that you can I think that cybernetics is about purposive systems and systems that have goals embedded in them. That's the core idea of cybernetics. And even second order cybernetics has to do with communicative interactions between purposive systems. So there's a recent many of the inactivists don't like the idea of internal goals. They want to say everything is dynamics, everything is organism environment dynamics, and there aren't internal goals. But I think if you're going to have a cybernetic theory of psychology and action, that's essential. Sorry for the rant.
Okay. Do you want to?
What do you think of that, Boris?
Well, I think, Peter, it's very good, very good description. But do you know PCT?
Yes, I was part of the PCT email list in the early days of email.
Yes, do you know Pars?
I corresponded with him by email. I never met him maybe I met him in person once or twice when they were still part of the ASC.
If we see the example which you gave of catching the ball.
Yes.
Okay, you described it in the style of cybernetic of second order as an observer. Is that right? You observed how somebody is catching the ball. Okay, now if we turn this into internal functioning, how would that look inside the body when somebody is catching the ball? How would it look in processes in nervous system when he's catching the ball? Now that was our premises of the functioning of organs.
So the outfielders out there, they hear the crack of the bat, they see the ball coming, a fly ball coming in their general direction. They're getting that from the optic flow. They're constantly getting visual optic flow information about the relative the movement of the ball relative to themselves. I have a lot of respect for Gibsonian accounts of how it would be that we would find the invariants that allow us to reliably catch the ball. In other words, you get under the ball so that it appears to not be moving, laterally in your visual field. So it's coming right at you. And then there are other parts of that person's brain that are planning to move and they're doing some both feedback and feed forward anticipation of where the ball is going to be, so that you put your hand with a glove where you predict the ball is going to hit you. So there are a lot of analog processes that are going on in the brain in sensory and motor areas that they're steering the actions of the outfielder so as to position their limbs and their glove in a place where they can catch the ball. I worked in the auditory system for a few decades. I know the most about sensory processing, but there are similar things going on the motor side, and similar kinds of feedbacks.
But I think, Peter, do you agree that in order to be able to actually catch that ball, you have a lot of practice previously built into your muscle memory, so that this time when the ball is coming here, you have the resource, you have that capacity
Sure.
compared with a newbie. I mean, the first time being hit by the ball.
Yeah,
The
sure.
neural system is just not ready yet, right?
Those circuits get tuned
So
up.
there's
I don't
something
think
accumulative going on there.
I don't think it's muscle memory per se. It's not muscle. The memory is, well, I mean, some memory could be in the muscle, but it's mostly in the circuits, in the visual motor circuits. Yes. Well, and as I said,
routine.
and as I said, the most important thing in my understanding of it, in being able to catch a fly ball, is a strategy of picking an invariant in the environment, namely that you position yourself so that the ball is no longer moving in multiple dimensions. It's only looming towards you, rather than moving laterally. That's a much more reliable way of achieving the catching of a ball than if you try to do it, while you're running. I mean, people do it, and they are very good at. I mean, they're amazing. It's demonic, how good athletes are about that. But the most reliable way, I think, of catching a ball is to get under it, and that means that then the motions that you need to put your glove where the ball is going to be in X milliseconds later is much simpler. And that's that's what I take to be a Gibsonian idea and a fundamental insight. It's not like you've got an extensive predictive model like some roboticists were thinking, that's it's gonna calculate the trajectory of the ball and then make a compensatory and then calculate a compensatory movement to do that. There are much simpler analog strategies for extracting the invariants that you need to be effective. One of the people, on the list, on the ASC list, Boris, you were discussing the cybernetics of the nervous system, and I did an extensive search for that. I was always looking for insights into that, and of course, McCulloch and Ashby and Gray Walter and Jerry Letvin and others were imbued with cybernetic ideas in terms of their take on the nervous system. But one of the people who was sort of been lost to history is Gerd Sommerhoff, who wrote The Logic of the Living Organism, I think, in the early 70s, and gave a cybernetic theory of brain function based on cybernetics. The problem, I mean, what I see as the shortcomings, though, of both Bill Powers and Gerd Sommerhoff's take is that they don't have any conception of what the signals of the system are, of neural codes. You need to have structured neural information, and you see this in pitch perception, and the nature of the signals that the neurons are sending, and the nature of the ways in which distinctions are being systematically represented is very crucial. Otherwise, you have these general theories, but they really don't apply to specific situations.
Do any of you know the story that Bill Powers was sort of kicked out from ASC?
Well,
do you know that?
yeah, I was there.
I'm sorry, I
there.
didn't understand. I didn't understand, Jason. Sorry. Can you repeat
I've heard, because when I was a student, I heard about Bill Powers and read his PCP book, but somehow he was not among the ASC community. So I asked around, and I got some impression that he's not compatible with the rest of the ASC members. So he sort of exited or whatever, had argument or whatever. I don't know the detail. So that's why I'm asking.
Well, I think this happened in the 80s. And go ahead, Boris.
Yes, Peter, I think it is great what you are talking about. Really, you are probably the best observer of the what is happening in our lives, and the best observer what could be happening in the inside.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, but what you are saying, yes, what you are saying that Bill Powers have the you said that I don't remember what you said. It's shortcomings. No, they're advantages. Yeah. You know why they're advantages? If I don't know, Jason, which book did you read from Bill Powers?
Yeah, I had that PCP thing a long time ago.
Yes, what that was PCT behavior of
I think he was sort of being accused as too mechanical, too first order, or too
oh, that was very old. Yeah. Yes, that was very.
I don't quite remember, but he just disappeared.
No, when we are talking about the observing, you know, Peter, we are observing the catcher, for example, the catcher of the ball. Now,
well, I gave an account.
You said that he works on the basis of coming the perceptual signals into his sensors. You know, one of the probably the most important sensors are eyes for
here, yes,
visual,
in this case,
visual picture of what is happening.
Yeah.
And now, what is happening when the transformation on sensors made nerve signal? What happens with that nerve signal? That is what Powers is describing. What is happening in nervous signal in nervous system when perceptual signal comes into the nervous system? What happens then?
Yes, so
that is the whole book. That is the whole books and the whole work.
I know, and I like Powers.
Made that, you know.
I like Powers' theory as far as it goes, but you need to know something about the nature of the signals. So in order
that's what he's explaining, you know.
No, he doesn't. He just assumes that there's a signal.
Okay, shall we go for his books? Can we go for his books? And you will see that is exactly what is he describing. Exactly. It's perceptual, you know, it's perceptual control theory. That means that something is happening to perception in the nervous system with a nervous signal. That's afferent nervous signal coming into the nervous system through afferent.
Well, all right. You tell me what is the nature of the visual signal? Or you tell me what is the nature. I mean, I know a lot about pitch. You know, when you hear a note on the piano, or when you hear the you know, a sound, what is the nature of the signal? Maybe that didn't come through because of Zoom, but you know, and you're going to distinguish between that and
Okay. Now these
Right?
signals are
You're going to
coming
distinguish
where?
between those two things. What is the
This
nature
signal,
of the signals that are being distinguished? That
yes.
that can be very important. And powers, I very much like the idea of a hierarchy of error and error driven.
We don't understand each other. We don't understand each other. You misunderstood me. When you say what is happening? The signal is coming. The signal is vibrations are coming where?
Into the ear.
To the sensor of into the ear, of course. And
yes,
for those
inner hair cells in the ear are
for sound bones, they are going where? So vibrations go through sound bones, and what happens then?
Well, they also, excite the inner.
This
inner
is going
ear
to be
cells.
too long.
Nerve signal, Peter. Nerve signal is created.
Yes.
And okay. If you would put the nerve signal that is coming from the ear into the eye, would it be the same?
There are some parallels between auditory and visual
Coordinations.
percepts. There are analogs. If you put it in, if you
I suggest that if we could
maybe
follow up this
maybe
next in our next session.
Yes.
Do you still want to hear the presentation?
On my presentation, we could maybe speak about this, okay?
So there are actually sensory substitution systems like those of Bakirita that put vibration signals, on the tongue, like they would use vision. So you have to think about the nature of sensation and the coding of sensory inputs in a manner that doesn't just say, well, there's this signal and it has this magnitude and there's an error there between what is expected and what is coming in. I very much like Power's framework, but it doesn't. In terms of trying to describe the brain, you need to understand the signals of the system, the nature of the signals of a system.
And what are nerve signals?
It's not just which neurons are firing how much. There's information in the time patterns of the spikes. So that calls for a different way of thinking about that.
Yes, but this is not anatomical and physiological thinking, Peter. If you think
it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
The sensor organ, will produce what?
I studied the neurophysiology of pitch in the auditory.
Peter, just tell me what is happening to what is happening.
I came from these ideas from the neurophysiology. Don't tell me that this is not motivated by the physiology of what's going on in a sensory system. You just shouldn't say that.
Let's continue this next time.
Peter, okay, we still don't agree about what is happening when outer signals are activating sensor and what is happening then.
We can follow up with this one.
What is happening then? How nervous signal is created.
Okay, Boris. Let's continue this.
Okay, we'll continue that on my brain. Okay, will you come, Margaret?
Yeah. You have the another brain working session that we can continue. Do you still want to hear my presentation?
Yes,
what you want to say
about powers?
Peter, we can talk about this if you want. On our private email, private email, we can talk about it.
I just want to say a couple of things about powers and the ASC. I was there during the 80s when there were some fractious conferences with both groups, and I was on the PCT mailing list, the dawn of email. And so I was paying attention to them on a daily basis. And I think what happened, there was a schism between the second order cybernetics people and what they perceived as the first order cybernetics people, which were the roboticists and powers. But my recollection of that is that the PCT people walked out of the ASC and no longer participated. And I thought that was a horrible thing that happened. But there didn't seem to be a way of reconciling that. I don't think that they were kicked out of the ASC, but my memory may be faulty. So that we probably need to revisit that and set the record straight.
Jamie, conclusion.
Yes. No, I just want to say, if you are sending private emails, if you could CC me on it, because as I look at these discussions, I think there is, if we say that it's all about distinctions, that there is like some underlying distinction that has not been fully acknowledged, and that kind of may explain all these strange dynamics. For instance, I found a book by Jean-Pierre Dupuis very interesting, but I found it maybe interesting for different reasons than other people, that he first commented how people practically became, the scientific community went crazy after World War II, because they couldn't really grasp what they had done. I mean, that they had been caught up and then killed millions of people in the name of peace. But then it also points out the use of metaphors, how the machines were anthropomorphized thoroughly, like theological reasoning and all that stuff. And then once the machines were made totally human, then they say, and now all humans are machines. So that there is a very casual usage of metaphors, and that's what I'm kind of interested in. That we also need to be able to address the limitations of the metaphor.